This is the Your Sports Resource Podcast, where each week you'll learn actionable strategies that you can implement so the operations of your club support your coaching staff and the direction of your organization. We are committed to excellence in youth sports leadership. Let's get started. Hello and welcome everybody to the Your Sports Resource Podcast. My name is Renata and I'm really excited to have Matt Bos with us today. He is a new member of the Your Sports Resource team. He will be a consultant. He is a consultant. We started with him in May and he's just starting to get his feet wet in the organization. So today, welcome, Matt. I didn't mean to skip on from you, but welcome.
Good morning. Happy to be here.
Cool. All right. So today we thought that we would talk a bit about the importance of having or building that relationship between the head coach and the board. And I guess when we say the board, we're talking about the president and really about having those regular meetings or consistent meetings in order to build that relationship. You wrote a post in, or I guess an article for Swim Swam, and really you kind of put out there a challenge for the coaches to really kind of use the board to their advantage, right? So from your perspective, why do you feel it's really important that the coaches build this type of relationship with their board or their head coach, to have those frequent relationships with them or frequent interactions with them?
Yeah, it's, I think I bring a couple different perspectives, having been a coach at a lot of different levels and then having sat on some boards for different youth sports organizations within my own kids sports or within my community. I kind of like to take stuff and look at it from the coach's perspective still, because I feel like I'm still a coach. And I mean, we're always looking for something, some advantage, and your board is this pool of resources that are kind of sitting right there. And rather than kind of look at it as a nuisance or something that you have to do or a task, it's kind of shifting that mindset and saying, how can I use these resources to my advantage to make, my day-to-day better, easier, to kind of keep building my program and then ultimately, kind of project myself and extend myself by using those resources. So I think it's an untapped resource at times.
Yeah. I mean, even for those organizations where coaches feel that the board's not all that great, right? You still have to build that relationship, because it is ultimately they run the business, right? So the coach acts as wears the hat of the CEO of the organization oftentimes, unless it's a big club and there's an executive director. But they act as the CEO and they still have to report into a board. So whether you feel like your board has that skill set or not, it's still important for you to build the relationship, because you want them to, support your goals and where you want to go. And, when there's problems, you want them to be able to, be on the same page as you and not, we're going to get into the specifics, but be on the same page with you and not, always having to maybe defend the coach, but really support the coach in the eyes of the parents. So I'm just going to piggyback off what you were saying as far as, they have a skill set that actually adds to the coaches, which they do. But even if as a coach, you feel like they don't, there's still a need for you to build that relationship with them, because ultimately that's the structure of your organization and you need to be able to work in those areas. Right.
Right. And I mean, sometimes I think it's just, you need to kind of bridge that gap too, because who knows what's happened prior, right? It could have been a prior board. It could have been a prior coach. And it's just being proactive and saying, okay, I'm going to I'm going to make this a priority. And sometimes when you make it the priority, you can change their mindset and hopefully change that relationship dynamic. But it's not good to sit back and just kind of wait for it to happen
Yeah.
or not want it to happen, right?
Yeah.
Like you got to be proactive.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's start with talking about how building this relationship can help in the long-term planning or the strategy of the organization.
Yeah, I mean, obviously you're going to sit in these board meetings and there's going to be, visions and goals and strategy that is constantly talked about. Um, the hard part, I think, is then what happens in between those meetings sometimes. And sometimes there's this huge gap, right? And the board president is not necessarily going to be present on your day to day. And
Right.
you're kind of the person who's sitting there and feeling the pulse of the team, whether it's from the swimmer's perspective, the parents' perspective. And when, sometimes you have these initiatives, say, that are kind of put into place. And I mean, an example could be, and I'm going off of some of my previous experiences where, it's like, hey, we want to, as a board, we're talking about, combining groups or changing some of the structure of the team. And, they're not necessarily there and present all of the
Yeah.
time. So it's kind of easy then if you have these regular scheduled meetings where it's like you can kind of sit down with your board president and say, listen, hey, from a coach's perspective, here's kind of what we're seeing, right? And that we're, here's where we feel we're going to be best suited to serve our membership. And, and then that way it's that they have your kind of perspective where it's not in this
Yeah.
meeting setting and everybody's trying to get their point across, right? And you're kind of giving them information to go back into the next meeting that maybe they wouldn't have. And then
Yeah.
there's the potential for them to be a bigger advocate for the coaches, because they have more background on it.
Right. And actually, the example that you use, the board shouldn't be involved in that kind of discussion anyhow, as far as what groups should be doing. That's for the coach to do. But often that is the type of conversation they end up having because there's some type of noise happening, whether it's good or bad, right? There's some kind of noise that is happening with the parents that, they're fielding these kind of conversations. Whereas, like you said, if there's that constant regular communication, then, they're kind of on the same ground. I think also too, like often when I've been working with clubs, it's very interesting in that how often I see that a board has a different vision than the head coach does, and while sometimes that can work in tandem and be okay, obviously it's not the most practical or efficient way to operate, and that's also how you get a disconnect because a coach wants to go in a specific direction with their team, and the board may have a completely different view. So when that doesn't align, it makes it very difficult. So what do you think about the head coach really um, being a part of, or actually being the main focal part for developing the vision and the strategy for the organization?
Yeah, I mean, your hope is that the coach is there, right, from year to
Right.
year to year, that you're not having that turnover. And I think part of that process is when they have ownership of the program, that can
Yep.
make all of the difference, right? The board is set up to be a short term. 'Cause, I mean, just obviously we know most of these boards are parents, and they
Yep.
just don't have the time to kind of sit there and do this year after year. But the coach is the one that you want, and that's the continued voice that you want to hear. So giving, well, I think in any situation when you have ownership of it, you're gonna put in a little bit more effort. You're gonna
Yeah.
kind of see how that affects your membership, and so I think it's crucial that the coach is the voice and that long term plan, um, and vision and the mission, that's all set out by the coach.
Yeah.
but you need to kind of get the board on, yeah, on the same, set of tracks with you there. So
Absolutely.
having that open communication, being transparent with your board, like those are the important things. Because as you have even new board members coming in, new people, you're kind of the person, the glue that needs to kind of hold that together and kind of get those people on board with what that mindset is and what that maybe mission or vision for that team is. So again, it comes back to being proactive and you being the one that's pushing these things, because you're the one who who's hopefully going to
Yeah.
be there, and honestly has a lot more to lose at some point. This
Yeah.
is your job, right? Like this
Yeah,
is
absolutely.
yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah. So it's I think it's crucial that the coach is the one kind of driving the ship.
Okay. You mentioned that so they have to have those regular conversations and should be, let's talk about that clear and transparent communication. So, how do you do that regularly or, maybe what is your insight on what they should be sharing regularly without it feeling like it's so onerous on the coach or over overloading the president with a lot of information? You
I
still
mean,
have
it
to
could be
communicate, but how do you do it right, you know?
Yeah, yeah, and it could be simple. I mean, it could be in a whatever setting. It could be in a pool office. It could be in a coffee shop. It could be a phone call one week. It could be a Zoom call one week. It's just
Yeah.
it doesn't have to be formal. It's just that kind of check in because again, you're the day to day, so you're seeing potential little issues that pop up within your coaching staff, your athletes, what parents may be saying. So it's that day to day little communications that kind
Yeah.
of start to kind of pile up, right? So what you're trying to avoid is having that big kind of breaking point where something just comes to a head and everybody's kind of throwing up their hands going, we had no idea, that these were issues or that this stuff was happening.
Right.
So, and it kind of works both ways, right? I mean, the board's going to talk and there's going to be parent chatter that's going on that, the board or members of the board, your president can kind of bring to you and say, hey, listen, we're hearing a little bit of this, just to kind of give you a heads up. This way, you can kind of get out ahead of something if it does become an issue. So,
Yeah.
and it doesn't have to be like this big formal thing. It's just making sure that you have those normal check-ins. And by kind of having them scheduled out a little bit or making them regular, it's not something that's going to kind of fall by the wayside. It's not going to be, oh, we got
Yeah.
busy this week and we just kind of let it go. Well, if it's busy
Yeah.
that week, send an email. Hey, here's my quick updates. This is kind of what's happening. Or, it's a quick phone call when, people are on the way to or from work. So it doesn't have to be, something that you're just stressing about. It has to be more of something that you're just like, hey, I'm going to pass this information on. I'm going to receive some
Yeah.
information and, we can all make better decisions now moving forward. So,
Right.
yeah.
And they're just sharing updates, right? So it's not necessarily that you're expecting to provide the board president a rundown of every little thing that you did and every little thing that the staff did. It's really just an overall update and awareness so they are on the same page and they understand what's going on. I mean, you used problems as an example, and I completely agree. A big part of the issues, like when an issue arises or some type of conflict arises, it's very hard for boards. So one of the complaints I hear a lot is that the head coaches don't feel like the boards support them with the parents when there's a problem. But what I have found, and this is not always the case, but what I have found a lot of times, it's because the board is caught on the back foot, right? There hasn't been enough communication so the board can can behave as if they're on the same page. They're caught off guard. They don't know what to say, right? And usually their thought process is they want to solve the problem. So if you're communicating with your board president quite often, and then there's starting to get these phone calls of some kind of blow up that's happening, the board president and the rest of the board via him or her should already know about this and be able to be prepared to speak to the problem in order to support the head coach. They could say things like, hey, no, we understand that this happened this week and we understand the process that the coach is following and we fully support them, and that's the type of conversation you want, right? But that can only happen, that type of solving that conflict instead of creating a bigger divide can only happen if they're informed or armed with the information, right?
Yeah.
So
And
if they're
it's the same thing
consistently
with your
left
athletes,
out. Yeah, yeah,
right? It's the same
absolutely.
thing.
Absolutely.
The more information they relay to you, the better decisions that you potentially make. I do that,
Yeah.
with my own kids, with school, say,
Yeah.
where, hey, what's going on in the classroom? What are the grades? Hey, I struggled on this. If you're having that communication and then all of a sudden you get a notice that, oh, hey, they're struggling in this class. Well, you
Right.
kind of know that instead of going, oh, my child's failing. Well, no,
Right.
we know what the struggles have been. We know how to adapt it. And
Yeah.
coaches do that with athletes all the time. And I agree. I think the board, if a problem comes to them, they're going to be reactive because they're
Yeah.
probably assuming it's a big problem, and the coaches may be sitting there going, "It's not a
Yeah.
big problem. It's not a big problem. We
Yeah.
we
We've
kind of know
got it
what's
all.
going
It's
on,
all in
right?"
hand. We got it.
Yeah,
Same thing
yeah.
with big decisions. Like if the coach decides to switch up the groups or the requirements to move from group to group, right? That could be a big shock to the parents, right? And those kinds of things cause a lot of like phone calls to the board. Why is he doing,
Mhm.
instead of talking to the coach directly as they should, they'll call the board. Well, if the coach is going to make a big decision like that, he knows he's going to make it, then he should be speaking to the board and saying, these are the changes and these are why I'm making the changes, because there may be, so much common sense and strategy behind it that it's great, but on the surface all anybody sees is disruption and change. So if the head coach can talk to the board and let them know what their plans are, then again the board can be there to support them and help be their advocate and talk about why that change is being made. So
Yeah, and it kind of works both ways, right? You're giving that information so they have your understanding,
mm,
and I look at it the other way, where as a
absolutely. Yep.
coach, hey, if I'm going into a meeting, I I want to know, right? I want to know how can I best prepare to go in there and be persuasive and kind of have people understanding my point, maybe have an understanding of where their questions may lie, or where where their concerns are, so that way I can kind of be prepared, and when I go into that meeting I can be prepared to answer the questions because I kind of know where they're going to be. And then obviously that gives me a little bit better chance to
Yeah.
kind of get what I feel like I need for my program and for my athletes. So again, it's not a one-way street, right? You can
Right.
kind of use this to your advantage to kind of arm yourself with information and at least know what's going on, because as we all know, there's the talk that's going to happen around the pool deck. Well, as a board member, I mean, I've been in these situations too. We go into these meetings and as we're leaving, we're on a phone call on the way home from the
Yeah.
meeting with certain people trying to kind of, okay, here's what happened now, what are we going to do, how are we going to address this situation, or how are we going to put this out to our membership. So all of these little conversations are continuing to happen even after the meetings, and again, use this to your advantage then to say, okay, now I kind of know what maybe some of those are, and have some of those insights where I can now just be better prepared myself. So
Yeah.
there's
Yeah.
it's definitely a two-way street for sure.
Absolutely. All right, let's switch over to how building that relationship can help with just the basic need of certain resources, whether it's equipment or finding another pool to pull, maybe the team is growing. Like how can this relationship help in the resources area?
Well, I mean, it's probably going to be, at times one of the biggest challenges that a team is going to come across. I mean,
Yeah.
if it's adding a new pool, I mean, obviously we're looking at potentially something that's, very huge impact on the budget, very huge on maybe the structure of the team. And then it could be as simple, like you said, as equipment. I mean, and as coaches, we're always like, all
Yeah.
right, what else can I get? Right? What other
Yeah.
tools can I add to to my program, to my to give to my athletes? And I've been in that situation, right, where I'm like, hey, there's some new technology coming out. I think this would be super beneficial, right? You go into that board meeting and it's, that's expensive, right? And
Yeah.
it's and a lot of times maybe it's okay, well, it benefits some kids, it doesn't benefit, all of the kids. But as a coach, you're like, you're seeing that, hey, I think this could be super helpful. I think it could be super important. And maybe it doesn't benefit, all the kids immediately, but down the road, this is something that's going to be super helpful for everybody as they kind of
Yeah.
develop through my program. Um, and again, big ticket items, especially, it's scary for a board to go in, or anybody to say, okay, we have to make these
Yeah.
decisions. So, and I, like I said, being in this situation where it's like, okay, I'm going to have some more meetings. I'm going to, pull some more resources. I'm going to do some more research on this, and, being able to kind of share that with someone like your board president,
Hmm.
on the side, again, can kind of sway them, hopefully, to understand. Because again, if you can get them to understand how it impacts your kids day to day, then it's easier for them to go into say that next meeting and be an advocate for you and say, okay, listen, hey, I've talked to the coach, they've done this research, I see how this could impact our kids. This
Yeah.
is something that we heavily need to consider. So I think that resources are going to be huge in a program, and
Yeah.
probably sometimes your biggest challenges, for sure, as an organization.
Yeah. And I feel like in absence of regular communications, when you have, like, let's say a big ticket item and like technology that you want to bring on board, it's always going to go easier and get buy-in when you've developed that relationship, right? So then they are more willing to understand, instead of them not really seeing you engaged in board meetings or interacting with them in board meetings. And then, 6 months down the road, you're like, yeah, no, I didn't budget for it, but this is what I need and this is what I want. Well, that's a much harder conversation to have in a scenario where you haven't developed the relationship to where they can see things from your perspective. So I think that's really important, because there's a lot of times when you don't know what you don't know at the time that you set your budget up at the beginning of the year, right? So things are going to come down the line that you want to shift and you want to be able to change. Well, if you don't haven't built the taken the time to build the relationship to be able to advocate for a specific need, now you may not get it in the time frame that you want to get it, but you may get it much quicker than with a group of people that are just looking at the financial numbers, and because they haven't developed a relationship with you, aren't really looking at the benefits that it'll provide the club. All they see is that big dollar ticket, right? So
Yeah, yeah, and that's where the transparency comes in, right?
yeah.
It's if I'm going to go in there and be active in those meetings and let those people understand, here's what my thought process is, here's how I'm working on things, here's how I see this could benefit, and you just kind of have that regular communication and regular um, shared knowledge of for them, because again, these are people who are bringing in potentially a lot of skills in
Yeah.
other areas, that are differing from you. So part of this process is kind of going in there and educating your board members on, hey, here's what we're doing, here's why we're doing this, right, here's
Yeah.
how certain things can help us. So the more people understand and the more people feel like you're a part of it, and you're sharing what you're doing, for sure, the more open they're going to be
Yeah,
to
absolutely.
understanding what your needs are. And we all know that, right? We all know
Yeah.
that, like you said, especially again, speaking from the coach's, perspective. Oh, this is out. I need this, right? I need this right now, right? And it's
Right.
always that, right? It's
Right.
always, I need it, and I need it now, or I needed it last week. So let's get this done.
Yeah,
And that's just kind of
absolutely.
how we work as coaches.
All right, the last area I think I want to kind of touch on is the accountability. And I feel like the important, when you have those regular meetings with your board president and you've developed your relationship with your board, it really kind of keeps each other on track, right? So, I mean, how many times do you go to a board meeting and it's like you've got an action item for somebody, and then you show up at the next board meeting and nothing's transpired, right? So it gets pushed off to the following board meeting. So I think by having these regular conversations, it's really good for the head coach to have confidence that the board is tracking along on the activities that they said that they were going to do, because their activities directly relate to how the coach can function on deck and how the swimmers can function in the water, and vice versa. It allows the board to have a level of comfort and trust that the coach is actually working on something, right? Because he said or she said that she was going to do X, Y, and Z tasks before the following month or within 3 months. And they can consistently, do that check-in where it's just a little piece. How's that progressing? How's that going? And it just gives each side that confidence that they are, being accountable for moving the club forward, which is ultimately the whole reason why everybody is there, right? So you're there to serve your membership. You're there to produce great young athletes. I'm not saying that they have to be, all top elite athletes, but for each athlete, you're giving them an opportunity to compete at their level and improve and become, great young adults, which is what everybody wants. Well, you can't do that if you're not consistently moving the club forward. And I think accountability is just a huge area that you will benefit from if you're having these regular meetings.
Yeah, and accountability is interesting too, in the way that I think people look at it as, I got the task done. I did this, and you do that with athletes as well. Hey, I want you to do this. Part of it, though, is when you don't get something done, and I think you kind of touched on it, it's owning up to it and saying, hey, listen,
Yeah.
I didn't get that done. Apologies. It's not going to happen again. I will make sure I'm on this. And then you follow up and actually do it the next time, right? The problem is a lot of times when you're not accountable, that means that you said you were going to do it again, and then it continues not to happen. So it's, we look at that with athletes as well, where it's, we're going to hold you to this. Okay. Well, it's not always going to happen, but what you want them to do is own up to it and say, all right, yeah, all right, I didn't do it. I didn't get it done the way we needed to get it done, but I'm going to do better next time. And then you see that improvement. So to me, that's accountability, right? It's people are going to mess up. We're not always going to get our stuff done, but when you don't do it, just own up to it, and then move on and get it done the next time.
Yeah, because it doesn't need to become a finger wagging scenario. It's just about moving the club forward, right? So, and each side having confidence that you're doing your part to move the club forward. So, all right. So, what would you recommend to the coaches or even the board presidents who are listening to this podcast if you're struggling to get regular and consistent meetings? What should they do?
Again, you got to be proactive, and it's somebody has to kind of take the reins on this, right? Somebody, whether it is the board president, whether you're a head coach listening and it's not happening, just understand that this is your responsibility. And I'm looking at both parties, right? It's your responsibility, because ultimately, like you said, this is about the overall health of your organization, but how are you serving the young people within that organization and making their, an impact in their lives? So when you kind of look at that and say, here's what we're here for, right? And here's what we're about, then part of your job is to kind of step out, and maybe it's stepping out of your comfort zone a little bit, right? And saying like, okay, I need to make this happen, because these relationships that we can form are only going to strengthen our team, and we're going to only make our memberships, our membership better and have a direct impact with our athletes. So it's just stepping out of your comfort zone, being proactive, and it's not on one person or the other, it's on both parties. But if you're struggling with it, don't give up. Just keep, find different ways. And it may be that, like you said, we have all these different forms of technology now. It may be a phone call, send an email. If someone's like, hey, I can't meet, send them an email once a week, for a while, and see how that maybe changes that dynamic. Because if they know that you're open, you're trying to be transparent, then more than likely they're going to kind of reciprocate with that and kind of come back and do the same.
Yeah. And even if they don't, you're still doing the right thing by consistently
Right.
sending information through, right? And
Yep.
eventually you'll get a buy-in. If you don't get a buy-in with this particular, board member, then, like you said, boards turn over and you'll get it with the
Yep.
next one. The bottom line is no matter what side you're on, you both need to invest in the overall health of the organization. And that means that you guys have to have that amazing, you don't have to like each other, but you have to have a great working relationship in
Mhm.
order to lead the club effectively and efficiently. Right.
Right.
All
Right.
right. Any last thoughts or comments for anybody?
Yeah, I think just like I said, keep on trying, right? Just remember what
That's
you're
right.
there for, right? Remember what
Yeah.
you're there
Yeah.
for. So I think it's important.
All right. Well, we hope everybody enjoyed this and learned something from the conversation. And we hope we inspired you to at least put yourself out there and to consistently try to push for these meetings so you can build the relationship for the organization and for your members. Um, Please like and follow this podcast so we can reach more people such as yourselves. And don't forget to go to yoursportsresource.com. There's a lot of articles, free tools, all kinds of information on the website about our organization. All right. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for spending time with us.